So in honor of the first night of our hypothermia shelter here at Accotink, we're going to share a moving, powerful story that shines a light on those that feel invisible in our world. It is the story of a girl who goes on to make one of the hardest things you can ever make, a difference. And it is the story of those who are overlooked in our society, who are made to feel invisible, and why everyone has a place here, because we all belong. The Invisible by Tom Percival. Isabel pulled on her favorite jumper. Ice curled across the inside of the window and crept up the corner of her bedpost. It was very beautiful, and Isabel always noticed beautiful things. But there was no escaping the fact that it was also cold, very cold. You see, Isabel's family couldn't afford to have the heating on. Isabel's family couldn't afford a lot of things that some people take for granted. But Isabel tried not to worry about the things she didn't have. After all, she and her family had everything that they needed. They had each other. But one day, there just wasn't enough money to pay the rent and all the bills. Isabel and her family had to leave their home, the house which held all their happy memories, and move to the far side of the city. For the first time ever, Isabel couldn't find anything beautiful to cheer herself up. This part of the city looked exactly how she felt, cold, sad, and lonely. A family drove past in a shiny car, but they looked straight through Isabel as though she wasn't there. None of the other smartly dressed people seemed to see her either. Isabel looked down and realized that she could barely see her own hands or her feet. She was fading away. Before long, Isabel was completely invisible. She drifted silently down the streets, as pale and thin as the wind, and nobody saw her at all. But now that Isabel was invisible, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Other invisible people, lots of them. There was an old lady planting flowers in empty paint pots. There was the man that slept on a bench feeding the birds in the park. And there was the boy who had been forced to leave his home in another country, helping to mend someone's bike. But they all seemed so alone. Isabel decided to help. She planted flowers in the paint pots. She looked after stray animals, and she helped to fix things up. Then, day by day and week by week, other people joined in too. And the more people came together, the more they could all be seen. Soon, Isabel wasn't just visible, she was vibrant, and so was her new home. And that was how Isabel made something very special. One of the hardest things that anyone can ever make. Isabel had made a difference. With that, I'd like to remind all of us of the difference we make for others when we show up and help. Every smile given, every act of charity, warmth, and kindness makes a difference. This evening, the children and youth and their families will be helping with our first hypothermia night here at Accotink. Let's all continue to make a difference and show up for each other, for our community, and for the invisible in our society, because we all belong. Thank you.
This reading is an excerpt from Wish Tree by Catherine Applegate, and it's from the perspective of one of my favorite trees, the oak. I'm not just a tree, by the way. I'm a home, a community, Folks nest on my branches, burrow between my roots, lay eggs on my leaves. Then there are the hollows, tree hollows. Holes in a trunk or branch are not uncommon, especially in trees like me who've been around for a while. Hollows can be small enough for tiny salt and pepper chickadees or a family of deer mice, or they can be quite large, big enough for an open-minded bear. Of course, I'm a city tree. We don't get a lot of bears around here, unless they're of the teddy variety. But I've hosted more than my share of raccoons, foxes, skunks, opossums, and mice. One year, I was home to a lovely and exceedingly polite porcupine family. I've even sheltered a person. Long story. I have lots of those stored way up the way a squirrel hoards acorns. Hollows happen for many reasons. Woodpeckers, fallen branches, lightning, disease, burrowing insects. In my case, I have 3 hollows, 2 medium-sized ones made by woodpeckers. The largest one happened when I was quite young. I lost a tree branch that was weakened by wet snow during a nor'easter. It was a big wound, slow to heal, and my spring leafing that year was paltry, my color pale, and frankly embarrassing. But eventually the hole healed, widened with the help of insects, and now, about 4 feet off the ground, I have a deep hollow. Hollows offer protection from the elements, a secure spot to sleep and stash your belongings. They're a safe space. Hollows are proof that something bad can become something good with enough time and care and hope. Being a home to others isn't always easy. Sometimes I feel like an apartment complex with too many residents who don't always get along. Still, we make it work. There's a lot of give and take in nature. Woodpeckers hammer at my trunk, but they also eat the annoying pests. Grass cools the earth, but it also bickers over water. Every spring brings new residents, old friends, and more chances for compromise. This spring in particular has seen quite the baby boom. Currently, I'm home to owl nestlings, baby opossums, and tiny raccoons. I'm also visited regularly by the skunk kits who live underneath the front porch of a nearby house. This is unprecedented. Never have I sheltered so many babies. It just doesn't happen. Animals like space. They like their own territory. Normally, there would be arguing, perhaps even a stolen nest or a midnight battle. And certainly there have been some disagreements. But I've made it clear that eating your neighbors will not be allowed while I'm in charge. Me, I don't feel crowded at all, having so much company. Making others feel safe is a fine way to spend our days.
Community makes love possible. And I think there's, in particular, 2 ways that we talk about how this happens in Unitarian Universalism. There's acceptance and embracing of each other and the support that we give each other, and then there's the challenge to grow that sometimes comes from that support and sometimes comes in other moments. In our current principles, the 3rd principle talks about these 2 ways. It calls us to acceptance of one another and to encouragement to spiritual growth. One way of understanding this principle is to imagine love as a continuum that includes affirmation at one end and challenge at the other. One way to show love being that acceptance, that affirmation, that embrace, that being held, like we were held and cared for as infants. Another way of showing love, though, is to encourage another's growth by offering challenges. Just as a child grows and learns to walk, for example, step by faltering step. Sometimes the acceptance comes first, other times the challenge. Community makes love possible by loving and supporting us. Community also makes love possible by providing obstacles, challenges, even hurts. These too can be fertile soil for our awakening, for our growing love. Now, this truth can also be found in our new proposed values. The language for the value of pluralism takes this acceptance, this language of accepting one another, even further, calls for us to celebrate that we are all sacred beings, to celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. And the encouragement to growth is there in our new values as well. The language for the value of transformation calls us to collectively transform and grow together spiritually and ethically. Community embraces us with acceptance and even celebration, and community helps us to grow and transform. So far, I feel like I've been talking these as if they're two distinct things, entirely separate from one another, but often through community, the embrace of acceptance and the experience of growth can happen either simultaneously or one following upon the other. Think about how it happens in the reading that we just heard, which describes a hollow as a sanctuary for animals. A sanctuary that is created through destruction, a branch ripped from a tree by heavy snow during a storm, and the long, slow healing of this wound. First, that destruction or pain or trauma, and from that experience, we can develop the ability to love and care for others. At least that's how it happens if you're an oak tree. In my experience as a human being, when I'm vulnerable, when I'm experiencing some kind of pain, that can be an especially challenging time for me to offer love to someone else. There's a tendency when we're in pain, when we're vulnerable, to either push the world away through anger, through blame, or to reach out and grab for something that will distract us from our pain, that we hope will pull us out of the experience of our vulnerability. Buddhism names these reactions: the tendency to aversion or hatred, and the tendency to unhealthy attachment, to greed, to clinging. Buddhism names these as impediments to our own ability to grow and transform and to care for ourselves and to love others. There's a risk that we avoid the pain, that we avoid that vulnerability that would hollow us out. And as the oak tree shows us, if we allow that hollowing to happen, it creates a safe space in our hearts, a safe space from which we can provide sanctuary to others if we practice yielding into our vulnerability. Now, when I say yielding, I don't mean this in a theoretical way. When I talk about yielding, when I talk about pushing or reaching or grasping, these are the fundamental developmental patterns that we progress through as infants. First, yielding into whatever surface we're in contact with, whether that's the body of a parent or a caregiver, or the surface of a bed or the floor. Then from that deep experience of yielding, we're able to push. And through pushing, we have our first experience of differentiation, that there is something that is me, and there is something else that is not me. Next, we learn to reach out and grasp for something that we want. Food, or some other pleasant experience. There's nothing particularly positive or negative about these patterns, but the foundation, they're all important, but the foundation is that initial yielding. Think about what it's like when you push. Maybe you've even seen this. psychologically in others or physically with infants, when we push without yielding first, the push has a quality of a jolt. It's a push that's disconnected from the world around us, that's literally pushing life away, rather than the push that's the natural experience of first yielding into life, grounded in a deep experience of that connection with the world. Similarly, if we reach and grasp without that foundational yield, it's like floating in space without any gravity to ground us, without a foundation. The grounding that we can yield into is community. Community is what makes love possible. Yielding into community is what makes love possible. Part of the process of growing and of growing our capacity to love is to extend that simple, pleasurable, restful experience of yielding that we experienced as an infant and apply it to our own vulnerability. To practice yielding until we're able to yield into vulnerability that includes discomfort. Buddhist teacher Ruth King names the ability to experience discomfort as a core competency for awakening. Knowing, she says, that when we're in that place of discomfort, something is cooking. I love that. Because when I studied these developmental movement patterns, we had a practice of yielding that we called cooking. Cooking is a simple act of lying on the floor, preferably in a shaft of light from a window warming you like a cat, and allowing your weight, simply allowing your weight to fully fall and yield into the floor. This practice of cooking is a way to reconnect with that experience of being an infant, of being merged with the world around you. Yielding into our vulnerability, that can be even more challenging. That's why practices like cooking or sitting meditation help us, prepare us, train us for that yielding into discomfort. The oak tree in our reading describes how the hollow was formed by trauma, explaining it was a big wound, slow to heal. And my spring leafing that year was paltry, my fall color pale, and frankly embarrassing. The healing process can take a lot out of us. The oak tree continues, telling us, eventually the hole healed, widened with the help of insects, and now, about 4 feet off the ground, I have a deep oval hollow. Hollows offer protection from the elements, a secure spot to sleep and to stash your belongings. Hollows are a safe place. Hollows are proof that something bad can become something good with enough time and care and hope. A hollow can become a safe place, but only after becoming a brave space. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron refers to this yielding into vulnerability that is the foundation for loving as the soft, tender heart of compassion. It's our experience of suffering that allows us to be a compassionate presence for another person's suffering. It's the hollowing out that makes a hollow that can be a refuge for others. It's the entering into the brave space of being vulnerable that makes a safe space in our hearts for loving others. In order to grow our love, in order to be able to provide love for others, to provide care for others, we need to practice being with our own experience of discomfort, of pain, of anger, of confusion. We need to allow ourselves to be hollowed out in order to become a sanctuary. a sanctuary for others. To see the pain as a gift that opens us to the tender vulnerability of being human. Because it's when we've gone through that process, when we've trusted that process of hollowing, that we learn that our vulnerability is a strength. That change that we breathed in, that transformation, that healing, becomes peace and love that we can offer to others. Hollows are proof that something bad can become something good with enough time and care and hope. It's kind of generosity, this hollowing out, so that we can become a sanctuary for others. Something we're called to do as individuals, and it's something we're called to do as a community. That's why this space that we're in right now is called a sanctuary. And then we get to experience in community, when we engage in this process, when we trust it, when we yield into the healing that's available, then we get to experience this mutuality, this reciprocity, so that when I'm vulnerable and I need another person to be a hollow for me, to be that safe space, that sheltering refuge from the storm, from the overwhelming flood of some particular pain, there'll be someone there for me. And then other times, when I'm called to be a hollow for someone else, called to be that sheltering refuge for someone else's overwhelming pain, that I can be there for them. This doesn't happen automatically. It happens when we choose community and when we choose to yield into our vulnerability and make that a practice together. Community is what makes love possible. It's what makes it possible for us to become a safe space by being a brave space, by sharing our stories, by yielding into vulnerability, by trusting that process of being hollowed out. May it be so, and may we be among those who make it so for ourselves and for each other. Amen, 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 and blessed be.
All right, please rise now in body or spirit, and you may join hands if you are comfortable doing so, to join in our closing words. As we extinguish our chalice, I invite you to join me now in our community blessing with these words of David Bumbaugh. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.